Yeah.
Don't forget to check to make sure the
Yeah, I didn't have any sound in this time.
no shot.
Okay, let me say a few words about the midterm, and then give you a chance to talk amongst yourselves, and then ask questions. Okay, and we'll go as long as we go. Obviously, the prompt is very different this time, right? You had a lot of freedom and flexibility, creativity for that first assignment, which some of you really loved, and some of you really hated. We're kind of flipping things around now. You have a lot less freedom. You have specific questions that you need to address. So some of you are going to love the greater structure, and some of you are going to hate it because there's less creativity in having to answer questions that somebody else came up with instead of coming up with your own questions. But those are the two questions. 5 to 6 is, 5 to 6 is an estimate. I've already had one test come in. It's around 20 pages. That's fine, right? But I think you could probably get it done in a good response done in 10 to 12 either. The important thing is to follow the prompts very carefully, very closely. Notice you should not respond to that opening sentence. The opening sentence of each of those essays, and do know you don't choose one or the other. You do both of them. Okay, you do both of them, so we make sure that everyone's clear on that. The opening sentence, right, just tells you what the subject is. So don't read that and start writing anything. What you need to do is respond to each of the questions in form. All right. So the first one, discuss the meaning and impact the idea of republicanism. Okay. So everything in my notes from the lecture about republicanism, that is where that's going to come in at some point in this essay. What is republicanism and where did the colonists first learn about it? I would more or less use the questions to structure your essay, right? So I would kind of cut and paste this question into your text and then just break it out. So discuss meaning of your republicanism, that's kind of the title of this essay. What is republicanism? Where did the colonists first learn about it? I would have that across the screen, then provide your 2-3 paragraph answer. And then the next question, what role did republicanism play in the coming American Revolution? Provide your answer. Then what forms did republicanism take during and after the revolution? Provide your answer. It's making it really clear to me that you're trying to answer each part of the essay when you do that. And it's a good discipline for you because you realize, oh, I really do need to have some kind of answer to this particular question. I can't just focus on the coming of the American Revolution or the definition one and ignore like the forms of republicanism took one. Like I need to have a response to each part of this particular question. Right, part of what your 3 things that you're graded on for this test are the 3 things you're graded on for the first test: comprehensiveness, providing specific detail and examples, and clarity. Right, clarity. If you are using the questions to structure your essay, you're already moving towards clarity and comprehensiveness in trying to address all those questions. And specificity really just comes in with, do you have enough specific examples and details to bring that in? Students struggle with this more with what I call like the kitchen sink approach, which they put all their notes in, but not necessarily in a way that is not necessarily in a way that is answering the questions. So it's important that when you're deciding to write about John Dickinson's letter, that you know where that belongs in this test, or you're going to talk about Joseph Parker or Thomas Paine, that you know where that fits, right? I think I said as a way to process your lectures, after, after each class during this part of the second part of this term, what I suggested is you go back right after lecture, kind of look at these questions and see, all right, so he talked about republicanism today. Obviously that fits with the Republicanism essay. He talked about John Dickinson. Where would I put John Dickinson in response to one of these questions? He talked about the regulators and Daniel Shays. Where would I put regulators and Daniel Shays in response to one of these kinds of questions? The more that you can kind of take those, particularly the start items, but lecture items in general, and start plugging them into specific essays, right? And the first thing you might want to do is just say, okay, he's got a republicanism essay, he's got a class conflict essay. So let's take all of the lecture items, particularly the start items, and let's divide them. Is this about republicanism? Is this about class conflict? In some cases, there might be overlap. So it's possible that we might be talking about Sam Adams in one essay, we're talking about Sam Adams in another one. It's okay to have that kind of overlap. But the first thing you might want to do is take all of your start items in particular, but maybe lecture terms in general, divide them into two categories, right? These are the ones that got to go in my class conflict essay. These are the ones that got to go in my republicanism essay. And then look at the four or five questions under each part and say, okay, so when I'm answering this question, I need to make sure that I'm talking about John Dickinson. When I'm answering this question, I need to make sure that I'm talking about the regulators and Ellie's rebellion, Daniel Shays rebellion, possibly the whiskey rebellion is its own thing on there, right? I need to, all right, when I'm talking about, probably the PA Constitution, right? Something like the PA Constitution. All right, where does the PA Constitution go? Because he talked about it kind of as an example of republicanism, but he also showed how it reflected class conflict. It's very likely that you might have a start item that is an important piece of key evidence in one essay that is also going to be brought up in the other essay. It's just you're going to be emphasizing different things about it, right? Talking about Pennsylvania's Constitution as an example of a kind of republicanism is different than talking about PA's Constitution as reflecting class conflict within Pennsylvania, or particularly class version of America's future. So that's how I would proceed, is don't just start answering those questions. You don't need to write an outline for these essays as you kind of did for the first one. The outline is already there. It's the questions. It's the questions in order. And what you really need to do is plug in the IDs. All right. So when he's asking me, what is republicanism? Where did the colonists first learn about it? What am I going to put? What specific reference or detail might I put there? When he talks about the U.S. Constitution, what might I put there? Is that where I'm going to? And some of these things that might not be clear, where might you want to put them, like the war bond scandal, Hamilton's funding program. That seemed like an important topic. Not entirely clear where that would go here. So where might I be able to fit that in, or even squeeze that in, if it's not entirely clear? But that's kind of the work you need to do first before you really start doing writing. Your outlining is really just figuring out, okay, what is specific evidence and examples that I'm going to put, and where am I going to put them where? To make sure that I'm covering as much of the lecture material as I can, and I'm putting them in a proper place. Let me reiterate before I turn it over to you. Just the rules about looking at outside sources, as well as the chat. I don't know, the chat could not write a response to those questions, right? At least chat cannot write a response to those questions that would only draw upon lecture evidence. Chat is not able to do that yet. Maybe next year chat can do that. Chat can write an essay on republicanism. Probably not going to be very good. It's probably going to contain a lot of information that is not from lecture, probably will not contain a lot of information that is in lecture. So, I wouldn't rely upon chat too much. Huh? The answers to these questions? I mean, some things are like Yop talks about John Dickinson's letter from a farmer in Pennsylvania. He might not talk about it in the way that I talk about it. Joseph Parker is not. You can use Yop, but Yop is supplemental, right? After you've plugged in the lecture material, then you go and maybe turn to Yop. You know, if you're going to say, talk about the Stamp Act riots, you want to use the Stamp Act riots somewhere in your exam. After you've gone through your lecture material and plug that in, you say, yeah, I think I might want to add a little bit more. Where would I turn to? I would turn to Yop and see what Yop had to say about the Stamp Act riots. Then you can work some of that material in. But you turn to Yop last. You really turn to your lecture notes. If you don't have full-on lecture notes, you have two choices. You can get with a classmate who maybe has fuller set of lecture notes, or you go and you review the audio versions of these lectures. They're all there now. I had to record some fresh ones, but they're all there now. So they're like 2 or 3 of them, they're exact same lecture. The audio lectures are the exact same ones that I gave in class this year. Or do a combination of both. You know, go and look up the parts of the audio lecture where you feel like you need a little bit more information, or you know, talk with a classmate about their notes, what they have in their notes. That was weird. But do not go to outside sources, particularly in defining republicanism. That's one over the years that students have turned a lot to is, you know, what is Britannica or somebody else say about how to define republicanism? Don't do that. I know what I said about how republicanism was defined. I know what Yop says about these things as well too. If I sense any funny business, look, I'm not going to spend a lot of time agonizing over this stuff. I'm just going to give you a 0. I'm going to tell you to rewrite it. And I'm going to tell you to rewrite it to really zero in on the lecture material. I'm going to ask you to, if you haven't followed the prompts very closely, turn in a good essay, but not necessarily following the prompts, and it contains information that is outside of this class. I'm going to assume that this person did turn to AI or some other kind of sources. I'm not necessarily going to spend the time tracking that stuff down, but you are going to get a 0, and you are going to rewrite it, drawing upon lecture material as your primary source. Right? That is what this test is intended to do. It's not intended for you to be able to go out and, you know, find somewhere on the internet a historical account of the Stamp Act riots. It'd be a lot harder for you to find information on the Mechanics versus the Merchants Committee in Philly. A lot of the material that's in here you will never find in any textbook. It's because I'm drawing upon selected monographs for this stuff. The monographs help give us a more accurate view of what's going on, right? The textbooks kind of flatten out our history. Hey, the founding fathers said this and everybody went along. Well, that's not exactly the way that this thing worked out, right? Founding fathers were saying one thing and people on the streets were saying something else. And they had to figure out how to get along with each other or come to some kind of reconciliation. And ultimately that reconciliation was the decision for independence. Ultimately, the lower classes, the Joseph Parkers got their way and the John Dickinsons got pushed to the side. That happened in New York and Virginia and all the states where conservatives were saying, we can't do this. We can't break away from England. And it was the lower classes and people on the streets who pushed them in a more radical direction. And then things kind of flip with the Constitution period, right? Where it's the lower classes who want to keep the Articles of Confederation. It's the upper classes say, no, we need a stronger central government because we don't want these Daniel Shays to keep rising up. And so we need to put them in their place. So this is all from the beginning to end, testing your knowledge of lecture. So make sure that you're sticking with lecture. If you feel like your lecture notes are not full, then you have the lectures to revisit, or you can talk with classmates to share your lecture notes together and correspond together about that stuff. Okay. So we clear on that? And then obviously don't write your stuff together, or don't
don't ask a classmate to share their written work with you, and never share your written work with a classmate. Okay. Yes.
Because these are two different like topics, is it okay if under one like formatting, or would you prefer two papers?
It's essentially 2 essays. So 2 essays in one document. Yeah, 2 essays in one document. Ultimately, what you want to submit next Thursday or by next Thursday is one document. But it will be broken out into these, like, essay 1, republicanism, essay 2, class conflict, and then you're going to go through and answer the questions for each one. Yeah.
So, you.
Does it say there's a YOP due next week?
I thought there was one doing like every week.
No, not every week.
Skips next week and when it goes to.
Yeah, it's whatever the syllabus says. Yeah, it's whatever it's whatever the syllabus says. So if you had one for next week, I meant you probably didn't have one for this week. But you do 10 over the course of the semester. We have about 14 or 15 weeks in the semester, so there's a number of notes in there.
For the last test, you allowed us to like send you it before it was due and before it's like if you need to fix anything. Is that, can you do that for this one as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, at any stage, right? If you're at the stage of, okay, here's kind of my outline, here's the questions I'm answering, and under, say, what role do Republicans play in the coming of the American Revolution, you have this start item or this lecture item, and that's what you're sending to me. So you're sending like, all right, I've gone through my lecture notes, I've gone through all those specific items, I've tried to plug them into each of the questions. Edwards, what do you think about where I've placed these things? Right, if you're showing me something like that, then I can say, yeah, that fits there, or it's like, yeah, that's a really good place for that. That probably might belong better some other place, or this is something you might want to talk about in both essays. I can provide that kind of commentary as long as you're providing that kind of detail to me. And certainly as you start drafting these things, I'm fine to look at them too. Up until Wednesday noon of next week. Yeah.
So to clarify, it's 5 to 6 double-spaced pages per essay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's all midterm 1, midterm 2, midterm 1, midterm 2, final exam. They're all in the 10 to 12 page range, suggested 10 to 12 page range. So yeah, 5 to 6 pages for each of those. And it's easy to do. You have enough material to write 40 pages. You don't have to. I'm saying you have enough material that you can write 40 pages. What I'd like to do at this point is, if there's no more questions about kind of like format or process for review, things like that, what I'd like to do is give you a chance to talk amongst yourselves about the essays and where you think things go, or what have you. So I realize this is a week away, so it's not, for some of you, this is very much in your radar screen. For many of you, it's like, what, we have another test? Kind of all over. But this is your chance to begin the group therapy session by talking to each other about how you're going to approach these essays. So take about 5 minutes or so and talk to your neighbor, and then we'll see what more questions you have. I've tried to answer the questions about process. Now you're trying to talk with each other about content. What are you going to put and where? So we're taking a about 5-minute break here. We'll be back.
That's about it. Yeah, because they obviously.
The normal class, right? You're all discussing where your professor is loading guns. Typical day in Edward's class. Maybe one more minute.
I needed to label which. I did it. Yeah.
That's like what we're talking like say. No, I thought yeah, for the first one. Yeah, I was.
Okay.
You are getting.
Well, I mean, I guess like,
All right. So, what like content questions? So, I mean, feel free to still ask the process, you know, like sending me things, stuff like that, or strategies for how to go about processing your notes. But we can also talk about content too. So, this would be content would be less along the lines of, hey, Edwards, what ID or what, you know, specific term might you put in what role did republicanism play in the coming of the American Revolution? I probably won't answer a question like that. But if you said, hey, do you think John Dickinson's letter from a farmer in Pennsylvania would go really well in what role did republicanism play in the coming American Revolution? I probably would answer that one. So all that is to say, I might not answer all of your content questions, but the more that you are trying to kind of plug lecture material into the questions there, I can provide some feedback for you along those lines. So while I continue to reload, what questions do you have?
If there is information that could fit into both of the essay prompts, can it be in both, or would you rather it be like, it fits better in this essay?
No, sometimes it probably needs to be in both. Something like PA's Constitution probably needs to be in both. It's just that you would be saying different things about Pennsylvania's Constitution, right? Yeah, well, what forms did republicanism take during and after the American Revolution? What's the answer to that question, by the way? You can say it in 2 words. What form did republicanism take after the American Revolution?
I mean, I'm not sure, but like, there was the 2 constitutions about the confederation, some of the first republic.
Yeah, how did Americans structure, Americans, republicanism starts out as a critical concept, as I talked about in the lecture. It's used, why is England doing what it's doing, right? While England's trying to pay down its war debt. No, from the standpoint of the colonists, what is England doing? England's losing its virtue. It's becoming a centralized power, a tyrannical power, and it's going to drag us down in its desire to consolidate power all to itself and to these bad men, as Dickinson called them, right? So it's a critical tool, but republicanism then has to shift to become from critical tool to what's the other C word? Constructive tool, right? What do we want in place of monarchy? We want smaller republicanism in place. How do we go about structuring smaller republicanism? Well, what do Americans do? They write constitutions, right? So what form did republicanism take? After it took the form of these state constitutions. So you would write about the state constitutions. Obviously, since we talked most about Pennsylvania's Constitution, we would talk, that is a place where you would talk about PA's Constitution. But again, understand the context in which I'm asking you to talk about PA's Constitution. I am not at this point asking you to talk about PA's Constitution as an expression of class conflict. It is, but it doesn't fit this question. I'm asking you, how does PA's Constitution reflect a kind of republicanism? And I stress the word kind of republicanism. That long stretch of lecture where I kind of define republicanism, or if you review it, that I was trying to say, look, everybody's using this term to republicanism to describe what they want. They don't necessarily mean the same thing, right? When Thomas Jefferson or Tom Paine talk about a republic, it means something very different than what John Adams or George Washington means by republic, right? And keeping that distinction in mind will help you kind of navigate through the different forms of republicanism, the difference between a Pennsylvania Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and the U.S. Constitution. So yeah, some items, like, it's absolutely essential that you would talk about them in both. What else we got? Yes.
Are these 2 separate essays, or are they?
You should treat them as 2 completely separate essays in one document. In one document, you're doing essay 1 on republicanism and then essay 2 on class conflict. And what you're trying to do in essay 1 is answer all the specific questions that are there. In essay 2, you're trying to answer all the specific questions that are there. I've recommended that you just cut and paste those. You just cut and paste, that first question discussing the impact of republicanism, and then you actually list the question and then your answer, and then list the next question and your answer, and list the next question and then your answer.
And that, those two should be a combined essay of 10 pages.
All total, they will be. Each will be in the 5 to 6 page range. All total, it'll be about 10. But that's always suggested length. It's possible that you could do a good job in 9. If you are really intentional about your words and descriptions, it's possible. But more often than not, students will go beyond 10 to 12. And that's fine too. You're not going to get penalized for writing 40 pages. More specific questions, content questions. Anyone ready to talk about a specific question in there, either an essay 1 or essay 2, and how a particular ID might fit there? Yes.
Would the Royal Proclamation of 1763 fit more with essay 1 or essay 2? Like for what you're looking for?
That is a good question for the class. You guys remember what the Royal Proclamation of 1763 is, right? At the end of the 7 Years' War, the king draws that line. What do you think?
So I feel like it could put into both depending on which way you look at it. Could it go in both or?
There's something, maybe the second one, because it kind of helps to show what, if I'm remembering it correctly, it's showing about the different views. It kind of can go with both, but like, about the question of whether they hope to gain some independence, that was kind of stopping what they were hoping for, if I remember correctly. So that can kind of maybe,
Yeah, I would agree. With the Royal Proclamation, the upset of the Royal Proclamation does reveal, what did elites John Adams, Ben Franklin, with the gain from independence? Right, those names were chosen deliberately by me, John Adams, Ben Franklin, the lecture that dealt with the mighty empire, from many empire that the Royal Proclamation was a part of, specifically addressed John Adams and Ben Franklin. So it puts it there. You put theoretically, what role did Republicans play in the coming of the American Revolution, right? If you're going to talk about it's remembering from lecture my discussion of the policies, the new British policies, but the interpretation of those policies, right? Laws are not self-interpreting. Right? We interpret these things through particular lenses. And so there's more, so the Sugar Act of 1764, the Currency Act of 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, the Royal Proclamation of 1763, all of these things that are touch points we know that made the colonists upset or led them to further consider breaking away and ultimately to breaking away from England. All of those things have different interpretations. From the standpoint of England, why did England pass the Royal Proclamation of 1763? We can't keep fighting Native Americans, particularly when they're doing things like Pontiac did, which is get all of these different nations together to come fight us. We can't do that. We can't keep fighting these wars. Look at all the money we spent. I'm talking about from the standpoint of the British Empire. Look at all this money we've spent trying to hold on or defend our colonies here in this 7 Years' War. We can't be back at war in 2 years because the colonists keep going into Indian country. And so to send a message to Native Americans, hey, we will keep our people in their present bounds, the king issues a Royal Proclamation in 1763. This, in other words, from the standpoint of Parliament and the king, this looks like sound imperial policy. It looks like a way to keep peace after a very long and very costly war. From the standpoint of John Adams and Ben Franklin, what is the Royal Proclamation of 1763? As we talked about, it's mom and dad not wanting us to grow up, right? It's mom and dad trying to keep us in the basement. The whole point of the 7 Years' War from John Adams and Ben Franklin is that we get rid of the French so we can begin expanding out there. We can begin expanding the British Empire into the West. And now it's the British themselves that come along and say, sorry, Americans, you got to stay on your side of the line. And even though focus shifts to the taxes and upset with the taxes and stuff, we know that all through this period, people like Franklin, Adams, Washington, Jefferson, they still had expansion on their mind, right? They're still trying to secure access to that land. They're still trying to, in some cases, recoup their investments because they've made investments in that land that are all null and void now because of Royal Proclamation. And you could see the Royal Proclamation, in other words, fit within a Republican framework. Why is England doing this? Because England is trying to restore peace between the colonists and Native American tribes. No, England is passing the Royal Proclamation of 1763 because England is losing its virtue. England is becoming a centralized tyrannical power, and it will destroy the colonies in its bid to increase the wealth of a select group of individuals. So that's where I could say something like the Royal Proclamation could probably fit in both, but it probably fits better. I agree with Hattie, it probably fits better with Franklin, and it probably fits better with the class conflict as a way of just explaining their worldview, right? Why were they wouldn't have been upset by this if they weren't committed to Western expansion. Again, the whole point is when we talk about our founding fathers, we only talk about them halfway. We talk about what they were against. We need to talk about what they were for, right? Every person is driven by self-interest. It's not just simply what we are against, but what we want to see happen too. And so we need to restore the full humanity of our founding fathers, not just what they were against, the taxes, but what they were for, Western expansion. Other questions? By the way, so we will have new lecture on Thursday, Tuesday. That is not for this test, right? You have all the lecture material now. So what we're going to do Thursday and Tuesday of next week is for the final exam. No more questions. Want to at least go till noon. What's that? That's terrible, right? I mean, it's not Nerf, right? This is Boomco, but that's how. No, you're good. You're good. You're good. That's the power of branding, right? Right. Even when it's not Nerf, we still call it Nerf. Just like Lego, right? Just like Lego, even when it's a different company who has ripped off Lego, because Lego doesn't have a copyright in its stuff. So even when it's another company who's putting their stuff out, we still call them Legos, right? It's just man, the power of branding. The power of branding. Exactly. But it's it's like Coke too. Like every restaurant I go in, I order a Coke. Even if I know they serve Pepsi there, I still go in, we ask for the Coke. It's real fun when you go to Waco and order a Coke because they bring you a Dr. Pepper. And then you say, no, I ordered a Coke. And I say, yes, that's what we brought you, a Dr. Pepper. The only words they hear in Waco are Dr. Pepper. So any drink you order in Waco is going to be a Dr. Pepper. You order a strawberry lemonade, they're going to bring you a Dr. Pepper.
Did you try that?
The power of branding. What's that?
Did you try that?
I have. Yeah, that's how I learned about it. I was in Waco and I ordered a Coke and they brought me a Dr. Pepper.
Strawberry lemonade.
Oh, I did not try to order a strawberry lemonade. I could go back, but that would mean I'd have to go back to Waco. If I'm going back to Texas, I'm going back to like South Texas, South Padre Island, San Antonio. I'm going south. Like South Texas is good. North Texas is bad. Like Waco and up, bad. Below Waco, San Antonio, McAllen, South Padre. South Padre Island is like one of the greatest places on the whole planet. If you want to go to Florida, don't go to Florida, go to South Padre Island. South Padre Island is like Florida without the Floridians. It's awesome. Especially if you go in January, because that's when all the winter Texans are there. That's all the 80-year-olds with money from around the country who go to hang out there, and you'll have no problem. You have no problem competing for space with the winter Texans. Go there in the summer, it's a little rough. It's kind of a party central there, but if you go in January, it's a good time. Very sleepy, you get all the beach to yourself. No further questions? All right, I am willing to look at drafts of outlines and drafts of the actual writing as well too. I would recommend, if not today, certainly by tomorrow or Thursday, that you're starting to do the plugging your start items into specific questions, right? Trying to process through those notes. That's the only way you're going to know if you need to beef up your notes through reviewing the audio lectures and stuff. All right. Have a good one.
And it's the last day you look at drafts.
Wednesday noon. Next Wednesday noon. Yeah, not tomorrow.
I really want to find one of those fully automatic ones. That thing is freaky fun.
It is indeed.